Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore a relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stapley
and Isaac Hill. So today on the Plant Cunning Podcast, we have Christina Stapley. And Christina is an herbalist, an author, and an educator. And Christina, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Very pleased to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. You've have an interesting life with a lot of fun topics to talk about too. Mm-hmm. But first, what brought you to the plant path?
Well, when I was a child, I grew up with history. My father was an archivist and a historian, and so I had rather an unusual childhood. Some of it spent in graveyards copying off names before they were lost, some of it in the back of solicitors' offices going through documents. And so I was very much into history, and in my early 20s, I decided to write a novel which was set in the Elizabethan period. Now, for that, I needed to know about the still room and what went on, and about herbs. And I already was growing a few herbs for cookery, but it meant that I looked much, much deeper, and I wanted to grow a lot more herbs to know what they smelled like, how they grew different times of the year, what they looked like for the book. And I just got so engrossed in the research. The novel never came out, but my books on herbs have.
Wow, yeah. Led you to the herbal path.
At that period, you see, everything you did was with herbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, with cosmetics or fragrances or pest repellents, cleaners in the house, medicine, everything. And so I went into all those areas and tried out recipes.
That's amazing. So you came at it from more of a historical perspective and a historical interest, and that shows in your newest book is called A History of
Plant Medicine.
Plant Medicine. Yes, and that's coming out from Aeon. But you've also written books on, you've republished Lady Anne Blanco's book on herbal recipes, well, a recipe book, as well as several other, like, it seems like that aspect is the most interesting to you is that historical aspect, because you also it's not reenactment, it's experimental archaeology, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
how do you get into that?
Well, it's fascinating because for most of history we have recipes to follow, but when I first started historical workshops, which is over 25 years ago, I was asked by Dr. Peter Reynolds, who's almost started, I think, experimental archaeology, growing crops to find out how much yield you could get and how this explained how many people that you can feed in a specific area and this sort of thing, and all the grain pits that they found from the Celtic era, which actually there seems to be far too many from modern projections, but in fact he found that you could grow an awful lot more. And all of that, of course, is organic. Right. And he was growing it initially, he was growing the crops on the top of a hill where we know there was a settlement. And he said to me that he would like to know how the Celts had used herbs. And we really don't have written information. We have a little bit of Roman propaganda,
right,
about woad, and a little piece on mistletoe, which isn't honestly that clear as to whether it's special to that time of year or not. And so it was really an open book. So I learned a lot from what was growing in the fields, and I looked at the archaeobotany and what was growing around them. And he had constructed a copy of a house from Dorset, a feasting house, so it was quite large. And I spent time under the thatch experiencing what life would have been like then.
Wow.
And then you put together the evidence that we have from the molecular archaeology. So what we know about bacteria and diseases at that time. And then you put that with what was growing outside, the sort of things you're likely to suffer from when you are in a smoky atmosphere, in a damp place, working outside with farm cutting, threshing, etc. And then I tried to bring things together as to how people had used herbs in early times. So it was very much experimental, and I had to think about how they would have stored the herbs and what they made with them. And also that you've got a lot of contact with animals. In the winter, you might bring the animals in. So it's not just sinuses and throat and chest and rheumatism. We know there's a lot of arthritis in early times. It's also the skin problems that you might get from the animals, worms, things like that. But it was great fun because not only did I do this at Butser, but I also did it at other Celtic sites, Bronze Age sites as well, and up and down the country. So different conditions, and a lot of them have animals. They're very well behaved at Butser. The goat used to eat everything that was over when we were making baskets. It was like putting it into a shredder. The goat became a great friend. But also, in other places, there was one day where a cockerel ran in and knocked things off the fire in its panic. I've had sheep eating my ingredients when my back was turned, you know. So you get the sense of how life was. And
cool.
So we made recipes, and the first thing you have to know is how to use the fire, because you don't want a lot of flame. You want a really steady, good heat. And then people were very interested in the recipes. We always made an ointment to take home.
Nice.
And they tried them out. So we got a little bit of trying out recipes as well.
I was curious when you said that you were exploring the fields around where you knew there was a settlement. Like, what did you find in the fields that were already growing?
Well, we certainly had nettles.
Nice.
We had nettles, we had brambles, we had more hazel than willow at Butser, but in other places, Flag Fen, there was a lot of rushes and water plants as well. But plantains, very much so, primroses and cowslips, poppies in the fields.
Wow.
Just mullein just down the lane. And the mullein, I use the big leaves as pot holders. Because it clings and it protects your hands, and you can just put it in the compost afterwards.
Wow.
The cleavers, I don't know what you call it cleavers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gallium.
Yeah. So that I use to strain the oil for ointments.
Oh, that's so clever.
So you put some stems one way, and as if you're making felt.
Yeah.
Then other stems across the other way, and you bring it up like a bowl.
Yeah.
Pour the hot oil through, so you get an extraction from the cleavers as well.
Yeah.
And it will take everything.
That's
and
amazing.
You've just got your oil, and you can squeeze it, and it's really very, very good.
Wow.
So first half of the year, I've always used cleavers.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's so amazing how, you know, we don't think of all the other ways that you use the herbs nowadays, but where are you can't just get cheesecloth very easily in Bronze Age England, but cleavers not only make a mesh for you, but you also get to extract the herbal medicine at the same time, and they're the best fresh. So it's like that's amazing.
So the first half of the year you can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I also wonder, did you look at like archaeological record as far as like what plants were growing there a few thousand years ago, and has that changed over the millennia?
I looked at what was native to here. So that's everything that has thrived since the Ice Age, really.
So it hasn't changed that much since the end of the Ice Age.
Yeah, yes. And certainly in areas in Britain, there's not a huge amount of variation. It depends on the soil, obviously. But some plants are definitely northern. So things like sweet cicely, which later on I would use to sweeten fruit, and they also use the leaves to polish the furniture as well. That grows in the northeast where we used to live, and in Scotland. Angelica is more one of the north, really. So you get variations in plants, slight variations as well, as to where they grow, obviously, and definitely variations in the constituents as to where they're growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And also as you were saying, the diseases can also have variations depending on where you are and the environmental concerns and whether you have animals or not. So
yes. And Flag Fen near Peterborough was a very wet area, and before a lot of the fen was drained, then you got malaria there,
right,
and a lot of fevers, much more than where I was at Butser, which is Hampshire.
So as we're going into the like colder and wet season, I'm wondering what herbs historically folks have used for maybe drying up damp cough or helping with any lung issues that might come with the season.
Well, we have an awful lot of cough remedies. So in the history, I have followed a number of conditions through the ages, so through the 2000 years. And one of those is coughs. And in actual fact, our cough remedies, although some have been introduced later, like the licorice, are the same. They're used just the same now. The ones that have gone very recently because of pyrrolizidine alkaloids is comfrey and coltsfoot. But coltsfoot in early times, well, even in Victorian times, was hugely popular. And coltsfoot, I think, a lot of people ask me how, as usual, how many people died finding that out?
Yeah.
And if you think about how people first came to use those herbs, coltsfoot it's very soft on the back of the leaf. It has hairs, and it's really good for lighting fires. And I would think that people used it to get the fire going when it had died right down. And then you would get down and you would blow. And when you're blowing for the fire to go, you're also swallowing in the smoke.
Oh, right.
And they would likely find that helped their chest.
Wow.
And a little bit later, we move on a couple of 100 years, and you find record of them using a reed and taking up the smoke of coltsfoot through the reed to treat the chest. So that's a lovely one to sort of follow through, but unfortunately we're not using it now. In Switzerland, they use the flowers, they don't use the leaves. They've always used the flowers.
Well,
but
interesting.
I read at one point that the coltsfoot was what you would use at apothecaries to show as an apothecary, like the symbol of the coltsfoot leaf. Is that true?
I don't think so. Earlier times, generally it was something like wormwood.
Wormwood. Okay.
Yeah, but you might well see it maybe Victorian times used as a symbol like that, because the coltsfoot rock was hugely popular, and also coltsfoot leaf was smoked. So you had herbal cigarettes to treat asthma.
Yeah.
And it seems an odd idea to us now. And coltsfoot very often went into those.
Right. So I wonder also, because there are so many changes from generation to generation and era to era. What were the big shifts between like the Celtic Bronze Age period and the medieval age?
Well, now,
I guess there's the Roman age between them.
you've got the Romans in, yes,
Yeah.
you've got a lot actually in between. So I think of our herbal heritage like a river.
Uh-huh.
And in the center of the center stream and the deep is that our own herbs that come all the way through.
Uh-huh.
And then there are tributaries from other places and other cultures constantly, really.
Yeah.
So because we've been invaded, we've been settled over and over again. And the Romans bring entirely different ideas and new herbs, and it sort of exists alongside the Celtic. So you've got both. And then the Romans leave, but a great deal of the Greek medicine comes with the Romans, and it comes back through, and it comes with the church. So early schools, as at Canterbury, then that's teaching the Greek through Roman medicine. And then we have the Angles and the Jutes and the Saxons and the Danes all feeding in. And Anglo-Saxon period is fascinating. They have wonderful names for the herbs. I just love them.
Nice.
We still use a lot of them.
Well, we have vervain is ash throat.
Ash throat.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have athel farthingwort.
Athel farthingwort?
Yes.
So
which is lovely.
Noble. What is a farthing plant? Is a farthing that isn't that
a farthing is a coin later on, certainly, but a chickweed.
Oh, chickweed.
Yeah. And I just love them.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge link of the people with the herbs during that time, because there's a lot of famine. There's famine and there's war, and people are really, really dependent on foraging.
Yeah.
So there's very strong links, and wort drinks as well, with agrimony and heather and yarrow and other herbs in the ales. And it's a really strong period. But then when the Normans come, so we're into sort of the mid-medieval period, then we have a change of language, where Alfred the Great had everything translated repeatedly into Anglo-Saxon, then it becomes Norman French. And so a lot sort of is put to one side, and you see the changes. So I've looked at the medieval pharmacy from there on and compared it to the Anglo-Saxon, looking at how recipes have changed. There's a lot of magical ritual, which is both pagan and Christian in the Anglo-Saxon. And we look at how that changes with recipes, because before that you could be made ill by being shot by a wicked elf with his arrow, and there were also flying venoms, of course, which nowadays I would say are viruses.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you call it.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Right.
And just as a doctor will always call it a virus if it's not clear what it is, I'm sure before it was a flying venom.
Right. Yeah. So was there a big difference in terms of plants and what was in remedies between the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons? Or what?
I think very similar, actually. Of course, because the Celts come from the continent.
Yeah.
So you've got really a similar approach. There's the Scandinavian approach, which is more northern plants.
Yeah.
But generally, it's much the same. But where it comes in is the spices and the Arabic.
Mm.
So Arabic influence comes in through Salerno, but also with the Crusades. Men went and tasted oranges and sugar and wanted it when they came home.
Yeah.
And so that starts a big influence pool there. And of course, the Arabic is very important to our pharmacy. There's a big influence on pharmacy with syrups and juleps and aromatic waters.
Yeah.
And so the Arabic is important. And Avicenna, of course, brings Galen back through again. So where things get lost, they are taken by the Nestorian Syrians into the Arabic world when they were driven out by the other Christians. And so things were translated, and the Arabs had a lot translated, both of the Greek and of the Indian medicine as well. And with Razi, you find a lot from the Sanskrit. So there's this huge pool of knowledge, which then comes back through. It's quite fascinating the way it does.
Yeah. And Spain was Arabic at the time too, and that's not really that far away.
Well, that's the Western Caliphate, yes.
But
yes.
it is amazing how it is like a stream, and there's like constant mixing and changing, and then, but there's also like the separate streams that then come back in different ways.
They do. And you find that, well, I feel anyway, that the role of herbs has always been to enhance the quality of life in all ways, but particularly with the medicine, it responds to the needs of the time. And so we find it doing that. Some students I know are sort of disappointed that there hasn't been one big system that comes all the way through and is intact as it has always been, just like China.
Yeah.
But it's a very different history.
Yeah.
And it's
because of,
and I don't think that China's, I mean, that has changed too, like
well, it has some, yeah.
There's certain, with, I think the communist regime did change a lot of stuff in traditional Chinese medicine too, and Ayurveda changes too, but there is like more of a much more of a continuity, I guess. With the culture is more continuous as well. But in Western Europe it is totally different.
Yeah. And so then we come on with exploration and introducing new herbs. And really us not behaving well at all for anybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just awful what we did, that we went and we destroyed habitats, but not just the habitat, but the beliefs of the people there as well, and their relationship with the plants. And so now we have to look to our own habitat and make sure we don't do the same here. That we need to, as herbalists, we need to look at the sustainability and the survival of our native herbs, because a herb from the other side of the world is always looked upon all over the world as more effective. It's stupid, but it's just like the cow putting its head through the fence to eat the grass on the other side.
Grass is always greener.
It always seems that people think that, well, if it's come a long way from entirely different conditions, it must be better for you, which I don't think it is necessarily.
No, and in fact, I think really the plants that grow around you are better medicine because they're in the same environment as you are. And as you're saying, there's like that main channel of herbalism, which are those local native plants. So, and they're what's abundant too. You don't have to pay for all of the shipping costs, to get them from the side of the world.
And I feel like sometimes they grow for us.
Yeah.
You know, like I have asthma, and I feel like every single place that I've moved to, if there wasn't already mullein growing there, it would pop up within 2 years and just be everywhere for me. You know, I'm like, thanks, guys.
It does that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
And
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering also about the Renaissance and how that changed things in England as far as herbal medicine goes. Was it more still of the kind of the same Greek medicine and so on? I guess, and we have like the influx of New World herbs.
well, with herbal history, it tends to go with the settlers go in the early 1600s to
Yeah.
America, and there is already, when the Pilgrim Fathers went, there was already tobacco and sassafras coming the other way,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of people were underwriters. They funded people going, thinking they were going to discover all sorts of new medicines, and it didn't really happen for most of. So we have some coming then, but there's one thing that makes a big difference is the dissolution of the monasteries.
Ah,
So in
yeah.
the time of Henry VIII, from 1536 for several years, they were gradually closed. And you find at that period, 1527, the Virtuous Book of Distillation is translated into English, and the ladies take over with their still rooms. And you have, in that book, you have all of the information you could possibly want of building your furnace of all sizes, your stilatories of all kinds, and the nature of the plants and how they should be distilled, how long they will keep, what you do to help them to keep. And so the ladies are keeping on the tradition of somewhere for people to go for help. Rather in the way that when settlers went to America, they tried initially to send a physician with each ship, but not many physicians actually stayed because there weren't enough rich people there to pay them. So they either became something else or they came home. And so you find ministers' wives were expected to know medicine and to help people. But in extremity, you would go to the governor of the state, and he had to either produce a physician, or with John Winthrop, he did it himself in desperation, I think, partly. And he treated a lot of people. And so here you have the lady of the manor treating people who might otherwise have gone to the monastery for help. And that tradition comes down with the Blencoe family. When I talked to Lady Susanna, she actually is American. She married into the family, but she said her mother-in-law remembered a queue of people coming every week for treatment until the NHS. So that's into the 1900s after the war, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And you have the books of the different generations taking care of people.
Do you think you could tell us a little bit more about Lady Anne Blanco? Like who she was and why she's important?
Well, Lady Anne Blanco was the daughter of John Wallis, who was a mathematician. He was a code breaker in the Civil War. He seems to have managed to be in with both sides different times. He came through it okay. And he was a professor of geometry at Oxford University. So she was brought up with very well educated. And she married John Blencoe, who becomes a judge and an MP. So she has a high society life, if you like. She's entertaining, and you can tell that from her cookery recipes. Everything is very elegant.
Nice.
And she, her father was one of the founder members of the Royal Society in London.
Oh, wow.
So he knew Christopher Wren and Robert Boyle, the chemist. And she was in that circle, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a knowledgeable lady. She also likes her supplies from the apothecary.
Mhm.
So a number of her recipes you can't use because there's white lead in it or something else of equal harm. I think I found 4 of hers that if you weren't a herbalist, it was safe to use. The others, you look at it and you think, well, I hope they knew what they were doing, you know? So she is a figure quite typical of her time. When you look at the recipes, they appear in many other books as well. She has some recipes that are from doctors, and it's got the doctor's name, and others, there's a member of the family name with it, and some that definitely have been tried and are marked as being very effective. And that's what you look for, because sometimes you know, I copy down recipes in a handwritten book, but I don't make all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't know when you look at recipe books whether they really made it unless they say that they found it effective. Or in some cases, it's in the wrong order. When you make something and you write it down, quite often you'll think of something at the end and you then put that in the wrong order. And I find that in hers, which is interesting.
So that's a tell that she actually made it?
Yeah, I think so. But she saw, or her father certainly saw, the Great Fire, the plague, and you can tell she gives wonderful instructions for an aromatic water. I have not found anybody else give such detail all the way through every stage, right down to the dose for if the woman be pregnant and for child, and how it's taken.
So for our listeners who don't know, what is an aromatic water?
Right, so an aromatic water is distilled for that purpose. So in my still, I will put 1/3 full of herb, then up to 2/3 of water. And so you will have 600, 700 ml coming out of the still. So it's quite a large amount. So this is like a herb tea. It has all the qualities of a herb tea, but it also has a little of the essential oil as well.
So that's basically the same thing as a hydrosol?
A hydrosol is more about distilling for the oil.
Okay.
And then the water that's left after that oil's taken off can be a hydrosol.
Right. Okay.
But this is the whole thing.
Okay.
And it's safer to take than an essential oil. And it's more than a tea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And they were often not only drunk, but they might be used as hand baths or go into a foot bath. I do that with mine. Or you can apply it to the pulse or the temples. And they're very effective.
Yeah. Well, yeah, an essential oil can be a lot, very, very strong, too strong.
Very strong. Yes. Yes. There's lots of things you mustn't do with an essential oil, and particularly very, very careful. If pregnant, don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So her book
really...
so Lady Anne Blanco's book of recipes, was it both for the kitchen, like cookery, as well as herbal medicines?
It is. It's very much for the kitchen. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So things like the lemon syllabub, which is beautiful. Her fritters and her pancakes also have sherry in them. She makes beautiful puddings, really gorgeous puddings. And I had the family members come to a day at the Wealdon Downland Living Museum, and we were in the Tudor kitchen, and we made a number of the recipes.
Nice.
One of which was they're like little cakes, And so they went into the oven. So the oven then was in the corner of the kitchen, and the door of the oven stands in, it's wooden and it stands in cold water. And when you're ready, there is fire in the oven. You put your food in there to cook, and then you put the door on and you seal it with pastry.
Oh, wow.
And the pastry gradually cooks.
Yeah.
Now, once you've taken the door off, it's off.
Yeah.
So you have to judge it.
Yeah.
And that was my first go at judging when to take the cakes out of the oven. And I was very relieved when they were just right.
Oh my goodness, yay!
So
It
you
smells
can.
as if it's burning the whole time.
Wow.
Nice.
That's pretty good for your.
So interesting.
Yeah, for your first time.
What a
doing
relief.
it seems like it would take a while to get a good feel for when they're done. But
Well,
so you
yes,
can
I was
tell
very
based
lucky.
on can you tell based on when the outside pastry is done?
In part,
Okay.
but it isn't the whole thing. I just had to really sort of, I don't know, instinct, I suppose.
Yeah.
But,
And then the kitchen crew gets to munch on the pastry from the door, I guess. Yeah.
but it was a lovely, everybody really enjoyed it because
That's
we
so
were
fun.
doing things in a way, you know, there were candles on the shelf above us and you had to watch the wax didn't drip down into what you were making and things like that. They really loved
Yeah.
because they got
Yeah.
the experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So this period of time, I guess the period of time of her father during the Civil War, that was also sort of the high point of the translation of a lot of astrological and medical texts into the vernacular English, right? So William Lilly and Culpeper were translating stuff and compiling stuff at that time.
Now, astrology and medicine goes right back.
Right, yeah.
As you probably know, to the Babylonians and Sumerians and the Egyptians.
It's always been connected.
Yeah, and then the Arabic translations bring it in from the Indian medicine as well. And in the medieval period, it was considered on the continent part of the training of a physician that he would know astrology. It was very much part and parcel of medicine. I think some people sort of think it appears with Cult because they only associate it with him. But
Right.
he was sort of at the end of that tradition. He translated the Pharmacopoeia into English, but the almanacs, coming from 1500s and 1600s, also have it, and that's going out into the populace, to ordinary people. Some of them are more on astrology than others.
Yeah.
And Culpeper and William Lilly are definitely, you know, associated with that. But they had to be quite careful. Lilly entitles his book, and I used to have a copy actually of his Christian astrology. So that is because you could be accused of witchcraft, and Culpeper was, but it wasn't about that. It was a little bit, it became a little bit dodgy. So you had this division between medical astrology and astrology that makes predictions about other things, and the astrology that makes predictions about other things is more questionable in the eyes of authority. Yeah.
Okay, but there was also a link. I mean, the with the growing of plants too, was that was a little bit more well thought of. I
think so, yes. But Culpeper, in his Herbal, he directs you to his astrological work of decumbatures, and you're supposed to use the Herbal with that. He lists that right at the front. And I don't think that many people have. Certainly not in the last couple of 100 years. Graham Tobin is a herbalist who uses astrology, and it's about gathering the plant with that in mind, making the preparation with that in mind, and as well as looking at the patient. And so it's not just when the patient is born, it's when the disease started.
Right. Yeah.
The physicians often looked at it from when the patient first came to them as well. And they would then make their astrological chart from that. So you're thinking about the astrology with the whole process of choosing the plant and gathering and making the medicine and how they take it.
Yeah, I guess you would have to be a trained astrologer to be able to do that in the first place, in order to cast a decumbrature, like know when the right planet is on the midheaven, so you can pick the plant at that time.
Well, it's strange because we're coming round to looking at the influence of the planets with science, and I think it'll get there. And a lot of things that were old wives' tales before, science is actually now coming to, just like the communication with plants and other beings, shall we say. So insects, birds, animals, us, they interact with pollinators and enemies, don't they?
Yeah.
And we're both.
Yeah.
So depending on how you treat them. And I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you be able to get a little into like astrological medicine gardens at all? So is that a common thing that people would do?
I don't think it is. No.
Okay.
I made an astrology garden about 25 years ago, and I was fascinated by what I learned from doing it. I did it for Culpepper. I love his sense of wit and his humor. And so I had a bank in the garden. It was when I had 1/3 of an acre herb garden, and a lot of people came round it. And so on this bank, I cleared it, and we did the signs of the zodiac all the way around the bank. And I then put the herbs under the planets associated with that sign and the ones in opposition in that section. And what I learned from that was that plants that are under Venus very often spread by runners. The Venus plants were a real pain.
So productive.
Because they kept going into the other signs all the time.
So what was there, like Melissa?
Well, that's not.
No, actually, Melissa isn't. But Venus, things like wild strawberries. The mints are under Venus. And then plants under the sun are more inclined to spread by seed. So borage, motherwort, under Leo, and you put plants together that you would never normally put side by side when you do this. And it's really quite fascinating seeing the interactions with the plants. And some of them are not obvious, and some of them are argued about through history as to exactly which planet they belong.
What is your thought on that? Because there are definitely plants that could be either, well, for instance, Angelica is alternatively assigned to the sun or to Saturn. But
it's definitely the sun.
It's more like it's an herb that will treat Saturn problems, like the coldness.
But it is very much sun, and Culpepper makes a real point of it, doesn't he, with Angelica, and it's one against pestilence as well. Angelica has a very, very strong personality. It's the only herb that I know that rivals elder, I think, for its
Mm.
personality and its
Mhm.
strength of will.
Yeah.
And I have been overruled by an Angelica.
What
And
do you
I'm
mean?
not the only herbalist who said that.
What happened? What do you mean?
Well, it was a very large Angelica and it had 25 heads on it.
Oh my
What?
gosh.
Yeah. And it was next to my
Wow.
pond
Uh-huh.
and it had flowered, it
Mhm.
had made seeds. And I'm thinking, right, now I want to take the root up. And the root just didn't want to come.
Mhm.
You know, it gave you a really strong feeling. It didn't want to come. And you almost felt it was pulling back the other way.
Mhm.
So I left it
Yeah.
and it grew again the next year.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
They don't normally do.
Yeah.
Must have been a very happy Angelica there.
Yes.
Wow. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
But, you know, this is how sort of folklore things start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody has an experience like that. And I thought it was just me. And then I talked to other herbalists and I found other people who've had a similar experience.
Mhm.
So it's one of those you take notice of.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, this is a topic that I find especially interesting personally, but I am also very interested in your experiences with the astrological garden. Are how are the plants of Saturn acting, for instance? I mean, those are a lot of poisonous plants in general too, right?
Well, Saturn loves his bones, doesn't he?
Ah,
Yeah.
And so comfrey
Mm.
is in my Saturn area, and also Solomon's seal.
Mhm.
And I've just had very good reason to be thankful to Solomon's seal for doing exactly that.
Yeah.
It does really help with deep bruising.
Oh, yeah.
So Solomon's seal behaves very well, actually.
Mhm.
But it's one that I have put in other circumstances next to lilies of the valley.
Hmm.
And I do remember that my dog, when she was little, I don't know whether she dug up the root of one or the other, but she chewed it, and she was desperately ill. And so I learnt to be very respectful of both of them.
Yeah.
I think she did as well. It didn't
Yeah.
happen again.
Oh, poor thing.
Unfortunately, puppies are just not, they're not canny about what you can eat and what you can't eat.
Totally.
The vet did warn me she wouldn't be. And we got tired of standing outside with her all the time when she went in the garden.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, Solomon's seal just loves woodland, really.
Yeah.
It's a woodland plant.
Mhm.
And I do like to put those plants which grow in the woods together, and lilies of the valley, of course, also is a woodland plant. Yeah, it's you find the fiery nature things under Aries.
Mhm.
So you've got rosemary, which is also actually a sun plant or a Martian plant, depending on how you look at it. I feel the amount of energy it has and give, it's more of the sun.
Yeah.
But rosemary is the rejuvenator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
it's not extraordinarily hot either. It's not like
Garlic or something.
cayenne or garlic. Yeah.
No. It's very interesting when you think of the temperatures of the plants.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping next spring, with a friend, we're going to lay out a garden which illustrates the temperatures of the plants and how they have been used.
I love that.
That would be really interesting to do. So it's the degrees as well as their nature.
Uh-huh.
And that's going to be a special. I've got one garden with her, which is about the humours, but also about the temperatures and all of the energetics. And then one of my students at the school is also interested in an astrology garden. and
Cool.
he's wanting to have me help him plan an astrology garden. So
Sweet.
I think the next couple of years is all going to be about astrology gardens and gardens that teach you the energetics.
So will you set up the astrology garden in a circle?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't seen the plot that he's got yet, so we will see how it goes. But yes, sort of reason says it should be a circle. But when I did mine, because I used a bank, you had a
long
front, and you did actually walk round it, but it was elongated. But nature doesn't like straight lines. Never likes straight lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
And I like to put plants also in my own garden. If I see a group of plants that grow together in the wild, then I will put them together in the garden, because they're already showing that they have a community.
Yeah.
And relationships under the soil. Now, the interesting thing is, now that we're really more aware of that, and I have done it for a long time, do I move plants that I think should be with that one, or do they already have relationships set up where they are?
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes they move themselves anyway.
Well, mints certainly will. I soon learned not to put them at the top of the hill.
They'll soon
They
be.
go straight to the bottom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's where they want to be anyway. Right.
Yeah.
Right. A little bit moister. And it's also kind of interesting that in the wild, you have a community of plants and they all kind of fill different functions to a certain degree. But if you put them all by function, for instance, if you group them by function, then they're missing like some of the harmonizing plants that would grow with them. And it's just like all the solar plants, for instance, versus how they would be in the wild. It's interesting to see what because plants in community they're all bringing something else to the table.
They are. And when I had the third of an acre, I'm glad I didn't really think of it from starting point, how am I going to set this garden out? What I did was I started a little garden behind the cottage, which was going to be a knot garden. So this was an open knot, so it was on the Garden of Eden pattern, so that you had paths going across and then across the other way, and little herb hedges around each of the beds. And so there was a footpath that went alongside that garden, and people leant over the fence and gave me lots of advice. A large part of it was using weed killer, but also 2 ladies said, would I teach them more about herbs? One of them was called Rosemary, as it happened. And I said, well, we've only just moved in and I don't know anybody. If you can find some more people, yes. And she came back a week later, 7 people.
Nice.
And I started doing her workshops from the house as I was making the garden. And we had a day on cookery, then a day on fragrances, and so on. And because of that, it went into quite naturally an area with the cookery herbs, an area with wines and liqueurs, an area for homeopathic, an area for dyes and paper making, baskets, things like that. And so it ended up with 11 areas. But some plants managed to pop up in virtually every one, because things like marigold, pot marigold, you use it in cookery. It makes wonderful wine with peaches.
Ooh, really?
It's used in homeopathic medicine as well. It's a herb of the sun for astrology. It's a dye.
Yeah.
And so, several of the plants just kept turning up again. And it was wonderful to really see how versatile they are.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But you learn about their characters and their nature through using them in those different ways as well. My first knowledge really on constituents before I trained as a herbalist was from dye. And knowing that when you gather a herb for a dye, you can gather from the same patch with all of the conditions the same, the pH of the water the same, the temperature of the water much the same, and you still get a different shade if it's picked at a different time of day.
Incredible. Yeah. I've noticed that too with just making recipes. It's like, okay, I'm using the same exact recipe for this fire cider I've used every time for years, but the plants are going to be different. The peppers are going to taste a little different, and the horseradish might be stronger one year than another. And even the vinegar might have a little slight different flavor. So yeah,
it's just never the same. And that's the wonderful thing about plant dyes. Is you never really know quite exactly what's going to be the end result. And sometimes it's marvelous, and then you can't get it to do it again.
Of course. Yeah. Yes.
That's what makes it so special, though.
It is, absolutely. Yes. So I like dyeing silk. I do silk threads. And then you can put your silk into the dye, which you do at hand heat. Often I've dyed some wool first, and then I let the temperature go down, and then I put some silk in. And then you can put some more in as it cools, and some more the next day, and you get varying shades of the same color. And it's perfect for embroidery.
Oh,
that works really well.
Nice. Do you do embroidery art as well? Nice. Yes. Awesome.
I've got a little book cover.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
So,
strawberries.
This is Peachy's Herbal, and I wanted to protect the book, so I've used sustainable bark cloth.
Lovely.
Which you can also embroider. And the green came from fennel.
Nice.
The red is Brazil wood. And the yellow in the center of the little flowers was Dyer's chamomile.
Oh, cool. So special.
Some bigger ones that I'm doing as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, my grandmother is a beautiful embroidery artist, and it's something I would like to do more of one of these days. I did it as a kid, but it's been a while.
One day.
Yeah, one day. One of these winters. Maybe this winter. We're not traveling this winter, so maybe I'll get into it. So we've talked a lot about the herbs and some of the cookery, but you also know a lot about trees and medicinal trees. So as a final thought before we wrap up the episode for today, I'm wondering if you can share some of your favorite medicinal trees from the hedgerow or the fields or forests.
Well, this week I have been out gathering haws, and hawthorn the flowers are beautiful. In medicine, I like to mix flowers, leaf, and the hawberries because they have different levels of the flavonoids, and what you need for the heart and circulation all comes together. So the hawthorn is one of my favorites.
Yeah, me too.
It's a lovely tree. We have them all around us. But the elder, of course, has to take pride place.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I bought this house, there was an old elder in the garden. And that, coupled with an old rosemary at the front of the house, settled where I was going to live.
100%. Yes.
Yes, so elderberry syrup, elderberry tincture I make with half elderberry juice, which is spiced with star anise and cinnamon and cloves, and half brandy.
Lovely.
And that is really, really effective. As elder is just so good with the immune system. and against flu and the winter things as well. And so elderflower also for ointments for both man and beast. One of the early things we did in an Anglo-Norman workshop at the museum was to make elderflower ointment. And one lady who came said, could she use it on her dog? She had 2 retrievers and they both had eczema. And one had always had a patch that was open on its body somewhere.
Yeah.
And so she took away her jar of elderflower ointment and healed the dog.
Wow. Nice.
And the vet said which of his creams had done it. And she said, no, it was elderflower.
Yeah.
So elderflowers were picked to treat the horses at the front in the First World War. It was an appeal for people to pick elderflowers to send them to the Blue Cross. The tree dispensary books came out of me really looking for a good book on medicinal trees that had a personal angle. There's lots of encyclopedic information, but not from having grown the tree and its medicinal use over the centuries, which I have done. So I ended up writing it myself. And so I've written about the trees that grow around us. The lime I love also. It's beautiful and soothing and really lovely. So I wrote about all the uses in the way that I've appreciated them, because I'd already grown 13 of the trees and harvested them for dyes, for wines, for medicine and other things. And then I looked at the history of their use and how the herbalist sees them now and how we use them. And I have never been comfortable treating patients with something I haven't grown. But in many of the workshops, I have used those that we can't grow here. And in fact, I have taken frankincense for the last 28 years for my rheumatism, and it's the most brilliant anti-inflammatory. And so also for the book, I went to Oman to meet the frankincense. And that was wonderful. There was a few trees in flower.
Nice.
And it transforms what is really quite an ugly tree into something absolutely fantastic. Just beautiful. And I went to Grenada for the spice tree. And so the nutmeg tree really captured me. And while I was there, I wasn't going to write about it, but I fell in love with the cacao, which has its pods of the cocoa beans anywhere on the tree. It's amazing. All different colors. It's just like something out of a fairy book.
So cool.
And so that was quite an experience, because Kelly, who took me round, cut a pod and opened it. And he said, just suck, because the beans are like a cluster of grapes in a white sort of milky goo, which looks quite disgusting, actually. And so you put it in your mouth, but you mustn't bite because you get the bitterness of that chocolate. And he said the tree that is, they use trees to shade the cacao trees because they would normally grow in that sort of environment. And it was a mango tree that was shading it. And he said, you will taste the mango. And I did. And to me, that was the real first physical evidence of those trees interacting with each other. And being connected. Amazing. Because it did taste exactly like mango.
Wild.
And so, you know, amazing things come out of looking at herbs and going to explore.
Yes.
It makes me also wonder if you're putting all the solar herbs together, does it make them more solar?
That's an interesting question. It's certainly, it's different with the moon. When you are growing the herbs, when you sow your seed, the germination is different. And for many years, I tried out with the seed trays on the windowsill, so they were in the house. It was nothing to do with rainfall, but they had the influence of the moon.
Yeah.
And they germinate faster over when it's full moon and in those first days. If you do it in the middle of the month, they take much longer, or they might not come up. And you do see differences at full moon, of course, in constituents in the plant. And I think you see differences with the sun drawing. So St. John's wort, for instance, is very much a case of, if it's not flowering around St. John's Day, that oil is not going to be the same. It just isn't as good. You need it then when the sun is at the height of its power.
Mm.
Now, some herbalists say that you should pick when the sun is high. I don't, but I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah.
The question is, do you take it before it's it's a fixed oil, so it's not drawing it out in the way of the essential oils.
Mm-hmm.
But most certainly it makes a difference. And I think these things are some that we have to take into account. Mm-hmm. The old ways of gathering something in a particular place where it found it hard to grow, for instance, would be right.
Yeah.
If you look after the plants too well, then they can be a beast. Somebody brought a plant to me once at a garden centre. I was there giving advice on plants, and they handed me this plant and what was wrong with it. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but it's a beast. You fed it too well, and it's just floppy. It's got no strength.
Yeah.
There's far too much water in it.
Yeah.
And you need to starve it for a while.
Uh-huh.
I don't think they expected that.
Yeah.
Before we came on the show, you were telling us about your rosemary tree. So
Yes.
did you feed that a lot of compost and things, or was it just you had it growing for so long that?
No, it had no food at all. I feed very few plants. And then it would be with comfrey and nettle.
Yeah.
As a liquid fertilizer, but things that put on a lot of growth, like sunflowers, yes. But the Mediterranean plants don't like to be fed, and if they grow really tender shoots coming into winter, then that's really not good, because they're more likely to be frosted.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to sort of think about that. But I do know that the lavender at the Norfolk Lavender Farm is fed. And when the manager took me round years ago, he said, your readers will not want to know what on.
No, okay.
But they harvest the lavender right back to the previous year's growth with a machine that they invented. And that is the secret with keeping lavender young. There was 20-year-old lavender, a whole field of it, and it looked young, and there was no woodiness at all.
Wow. Okay.
It says it puts on that much growth, you probably have to feed it more too if you're removing all of its growth every year.
Well, yeah, if you want, but you don't necessarily want long stalks, you see. They're putting it into the still. There's a quarter of a ton goes into the still.
Wow.
Unfortunately, plus a lot of bees that won't leave it. And a pint comes out the other end.
Wow.
And that tells you how concentrated essential oils can be.
It's just wild.
Yeah.
And that's quite a smelly plant in the first place.
It is. It is. I find lavender quite strong.
Yes.
So my lavender sugar is a half the amount that I would use for a rose sugar or a calendula sugar.
You think we can see your rosemary cup made from the rosemary stock? A little show and tell. Thank you.
There you go.
So that
He
is,
left a little piece of bark
yes.
on for me.
So,
Now this one, I keep rosemary in it,
mhm.
and I forget now which herbal I read it in, but long ago I read that if you have a box of rosemary and you smell it every day, it will preserve your youth.
Mm.
Ooh,
I
love
didn't
it.
start till I was quite old, so but I do have one. We didn't have a large enough piece to make the lid, so it has a cherry lid, but
Hmm.
this one is all rosemary.
Wow.
So
Can't believe it.
my little rosemary pot.
It's gorgeous. So that's from the stalk of the rosemary.
Yes.
Incredible. I've
Yeah.
never seen a rosemary that big.
Well, we are from northern New York, so
Yes.
You have to take our
I wouldn't
rosemary.
expect it there.
Right. I have to
But-
dig my rosemary up and bring it inside in the winter if I would like
Yeah.
it to survive.
Well, I did when we lived in the Northeast.
Okay.
I
Mhm.
brought it in,
Mhm.
and there was one corner of the garden where a rosemary would survive, and that was the one I took to the cottage. And it was
Mm.
planted against the cottage wall, south facing,
Mhm.
with the thatch overhead.
Mm.
So the water pours off the thatch. There's no gutters with the thatch cottage. You have
Mhm.
to get used to that when you walk out and it's stopped raining, but it hasn't stopped coming off the roof.
Yeah.
And then there is a French drain dug all the way round the walls, so there's gravel to take all that water away.
Mm. So the roots don't rot.
rosemary, yeah, the rosemary liked the water coming down, but then being taken away.
Right.
Yeah.
And that really was good for it.
What an ideal little microclimate for
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely, yes.
Mhm.
But the one here in the front garden is just at the bottom of a steep slope. It's north facing, but it has a lot of protection because it's down there,
Ah.
and it is as large. So I think this
Cool.
one also is well over 20 years old.
So amazing.
And I gather it when it's flowering, because that's when you get the best content of essential oil.
Mhm.
And I pound the flowers with sugar,
Mm.
and then that keeps, and you can add it to food.
Lovely.
It's really strong.
Mm. Yes, I love rosemary salt, like pounding the fresh rosemary leaves in salt and having that in food. I could put it on everything.
Well, that will help your memory.
Yes. Great.
Good. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Christina. I've learned a lot. You know,
Yeah.
it's nice to speak with somebody who knows so much about the history of herbalism and of everything.
Yeah.
You know,
So interesting.
so yeah, I've learned a lot, and I've had a great time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Christina.
Yeah,
I
and
enjoyed it too. Thank you.
how can people find out more about you, and when is your book out?
Well, the book here should be out the end of November, A History of
Exciting.
Plant Medicine, with Aeon Books. But I gathered today that it might be delayed until January the 2nd in America.
Okay.
Okay.
We have been at the very last pip with the index, and so that's something to look forward to. But my website is simply my name, so www.christinastapley.co.uk, and that has my earlier books on it as well, and pieces about me and what I do now.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Great. Well, thanks again, Christina, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Okay, bye.